it's important to be able to illustrate these ideas. So what I've developed here is a series of summaries of exemplars of ESD in geography, natural science, and life orientation. And in each case, they developed around lesson planning with the students, starting with real-world stories of change and being developed around concerns. So story, inquiry, deliberation, and change activities are really important. And you'll notice that the different teachers that we look at didn't all start with stories, but they started in different ways. In geography and climate change for grade 9, for example, Mr. Pele in Durban introduced climate change using a newspaper article after the Durban floods, and then discussed the class experiences of this event. So it did have a startup story. He was concerned with introducing synoptic charts, frontal systems, cut-off low pressure systems, and looking at condensation rates when highly concentrated water is driven in from the sea into a cut-off low. And he was concerned with developing systems thinking, engaging the students in collaborative research, and looking at the strategic anticipation of extreme events. So in the inquiry, many of the students had experienced the floods, so they decided to investigate the impact of the floods on local families and neighborhoods. Then they moved on with these accounts to look at generalized insights that allowed them to deliberate on the experience and to generalize the impact of the extreme weather events. Then into some change project, they decided to work on a draft of a disaster risk management plan to support families to recover after an extreme event. Now let's move on to life orientation, an example from nutrition in grade 7. Using the same framework, Mrs. Mjali started with a practical activity around a change project. So she wanted to introduce the students to the making of machewo, and she brought in a friend to tell the class how it was used for energy and health as a heritage food. And she was concerned with teaching them fermentation, carbohydrates, and glucose, and getting them involved in critical thinking, anticipation, and being self-aware of their own health. She then moved on to an inquiry, so she challenged the class to find out about sports energy drinks and exercise recovery drinks and which was the best for today. And of course, they all loved the sugary drinks. And this was set off against the nutrition of machewo, and the class deliberated how glucose provides immediate energy and complex carbohydrates staying power, and they contrasted the energy drinks with the machewo. Then she decided to get the students to write their own stories as a conclusion, and the students worked in teams to develop a poster that narrated how to use exercise recovery drinks in training, which was the best and which they favored, and the benefits of these as well. Then on to a final one in natural sciences around pollination in grade 6. Using the same framework, Mrs. Robbins started with an investigation. She wanted the class to design and conduct a bee count in their local gardens. Then she was looking at concepts of pollination and germination. She wanted them to be involved in problem solving and normative and strategic work. Then she went on to a story. She gave them a story of the declining bees in the area and discussed the practices for reducing the local bee problems around the bee populations. The class then debated what could be done to support bee life and to identify other pollinators. And they concluded with a change project where they initiated their conservation ideas that they'd learned to capture pollinators on cell phone images and to discuss how pollination could be supported. So each of these exemplars used the active learning framework in different ways. And this challenged the learners It taught the key knowledge, which is a central point in the Fundisa for Change, and also looked at the assessment of competencies that had developed in the work that the students did together.